In the late 1970s, Cadillac faced a problem it had never faced before. Not styling, not comfort, not prestige, survival. Gas lines were wrapping around city blocks. Some stretched for miles. Tempers flared. Fistfights broke out at pumps. Americans were waking up at 4 a.m. just to fill their tanks before the stations ran dry. V8 engines were suddenly being blamed for everything from inflation to the end of the American dream. Magazine covers asked if the automobile itself was dying. Senators gave speeches about greed. And somewhere in Detroit, executives were sweating. For the first time in its history, Cadillac was scared. Scared of regulations, scared of fuel economy laws, scared of Japanese imports flooding the market, and terrified of becoming irrelevant. This was a company that had never asked permission, a company that had built its entire identity on being untouchable, on being the standard of the world. And now Washington was rewriting the rules. So General Motors did something it had never done before. It rushed, not slightly, not cautiously. It rushed hard. And that rush gave birth to one of the most regretted engines GM ever put into a luxury car, the Cadillac HT4100. Most people know it as that bad Cadillac engine, the one mechanics joke about, the one that killed resale values overnight. But almost nobody knows how ambitious it really was, or how badly it went wrong. Because on paper, the HT4100 wasn't a disaster. It was supposed to be the future, and that's what makes this story hurt. In 1979, Cadillac was still riding the reputation of engines like the 472 and 500 cubic inch monsters, massive cast iron V8s, silky smooth, mountains of torque, engines that could idle at 450 RPM and pull a house off its foundation. These engines didn't roar. They hummed. They whispered power. They made you feel like you were floating on a river of torque while the world rushed past your window. Owners didn't brag about horsepower. They bragged about silence, about effortlessness, about the way the needle never seemed to move, even when you merged onto the highway. That was the Cadillac promise. Power without drama, luxury without compromise, engineering you never had to think about. But those engines were dinosaurs, beautiful, glorious dinosaurs, and the meteor was already falling. New corporate average fuel economy rules demanded efficiency, emissions laws demanded cleaner combustion, and downsizing was no longer optional, it was mandatory. The government wanted 27.5 miles per gallon by 1985. Cadillac's big blocks barely managed 12. The math was brutal, the deadline was real, and the penalties were steep. Cadillac engineers were told one thing: build a modern V8, make it light, make it efficient, and make sure it still feels like a Cadillac. No pressure. That order set off a chain reaction inside GM. Engineers who had spent decades perfecting iron were suddenly asked to master aluminum. Designers who had never worried about weight were now counting ounces. Timelines that should have stretched 5 years were compressed into 3. Nobody asked if it was possible. They were told to make it possible. What came out the other end was called the HT4100. HT stood for high technology. That name alone should have been a warning. Because whenever a company has to tell you something is high technology, it usually means they're not quite sure it works yet. This engine wasn't an evolution. It was a leap. A leap across a chasm they hadn't fully measured. The HT4100 displaced 4.1 liters, or 249 cubic inches, a massive drop from Cadillac's old big blocks. Bore measured 3.466 inches. Stroke came in at 3.307 inches. Compact, tight, modern. Everything about it was designed to save weight and improve efficiency. The block was aluminum, not iron. Aluminum. In 1981, that was radical for an American V8. Japanese manufacturers had experimented with aluminum. European sports cars used it. But a full-size American luxury sedan running an aluminum V8, that was uncharted territory. To save weight, the block used cast-in iron cylinder liners. The heads were cast iron. This created what engineers call a bimetallic design. Two different metals, two different expansion rates, one engine that had to hold together under extreme heat. Compression ratio hovered around 8.5 to 1, tuned for regular unleaded fuel. No premium required. Fuel delivery came from throttle body injection, one of GM's early electronic fuel systems. This was before port injection became standard, before computers got smart, before sensors could catch problems in real time. The throttle body system was crude by modern standards. A single injector sat above the intake manifold, spraying fuel like a carburetor, pretending to be something more sophisticated. Horsepower was modest. Early versions made about 135 horsepower at 4,400 RPM. Torque peaked around 200 pound-feet at roughly 2,000 RPM. Those numbers weren't exciting, but they weren't the point. This engine weighed nearly 200 pounds less than the old 425 V8. It helped Cadillac hit fuel economy targets, and on paper, it delivered the smoothness buyers expected. Engineers celebrated. Marketing wrote glowing brochures. Executives approved production. At least that was the theory. The first HT4100 powered Cadillacs rolled out in 1982. DeVilles, Fleetwoods, Seville models, Eldorados, the flagship vehicles, the cars that carried the Cadillac name into driveways across America. And for the first few thousand miles, everything felt fine, quiet, idle, decent throttle response, fuel economy in the high teens, sometimes even low 20s. Cadillac salespeople proudly called it advanced. Brochures highlighted the aluminum construction. Buyers felt like they were driving the future. But beneath that aluminum block, something was very wrong. And it didn't take long to surface. The first complaints trickled in slowly. Owners began reporting coolant loss. Not leaks, not puddles under the car, not steam from the hood, just disappearing coolant. The reservoir would be full on Monday, half empty by Friday, no visible evidence, no explanation, just gone. Mechanics scratched their heads. Dealers topped off reservoirs and sent customers home. Everyone hoped it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Engines started overheating without warning. Temperature gauges spiked. Oil consumption climbed. Owners found themselves adding a quart every 1,000 miles, then every 500. And then the real horror stories started. Head gaskets failed. Not occasionally, not after abuse, not after 150,000 hard miles. They failed early, in many cases before 40,000 miles. Engines that should have lasted decades were dying before the new car smell faded. When technicians tore these engines down, they found something unsettling. The aluminum block casting was porous. Coolant seeped through microscopic flaws in the aluminum itself. Invisible to the naked eye, impossible to detect without specialized equipment, but there, always there, waiting. Over time, it weakened the sealing surface between the block and the heads. Coolant mixed with oil, oil mixed with coolant. The milky mess that resulted destroyed bearings, contaminated rings, and ate gaskets alive. Combine that with iron heads expanding at a different rate than the aluminum block during heat cycles, and the head gasket never had a chance. Every time you started the car, the metals expanded differently. Every time you shut it off, they contracted differently. Every cycle weakened the seal. Every drive brought the engine closer to failure. One Cadillac tech reportedly said, "You didn't fix these engines, you managed them until they died." That quote spread through the service community like wildfire. And that wasn't even the worst part. The HT4100 also suffered from oiling problems, severe ones. The camshaft, located high in the block, didn't receive consistent lubrication. The oil passages were too narrow. The flow rates were marginal at best. At highway speeds, especially under light throttle, oil flow wasn't enough to keep critical surfaces protected. Cam lobes wore flat, slowly at first, then quickly. The precise profiles that controlled valve timing turned into rounded nubs. Lift decreased, duration shortened. The engine started making less power even as the driver pushed the throttle harder. Once that happened, performance dropped off a cliff. Valves barely opened. Combustion efficiency collapsed. Metal shavings circulated through the oil system like glitter in a blender. Some owners described engines that felt strong one week and completely gutless the next, like someone had stolen half the cylinders overnight. Then there was the crankshaft. The bottom end wasn't weak in theory, but oil starvation under certain conditions caused bearing wear. Long highway cruises at steady throttle, high ambient temperatures, low oil levels that owners didn't catch in time. When oil pressure dropped, bearings overheated, the thin layer of oil that protected the crankshaft journals evaporated. Metal touched metal. Once that happened, the crankshaft would score. Deep grooves formed on surfaces that needed to be mirror smooth. After that, the engine was finished. No warning light, no dramatic noise, no chance to pull over, just silence. Owners would coast to the shoulder, try to restart, and hear nothing but the clicking of a dead starter engaging a seized engine. Cadillac tried to fix it. Revised gaskets came first, better materials, improved sealing compounds, then came updated blocks with tighter casting tolerances, better quality control at the foundry, inspection processes that should have existed from day one. They revised intake manifold designs to reduce coolant crossover issues. They updated oil pump specs. They changed gasket torque sequences. They issued service bulletins that read like apology letters written in engineering language. But by then, the damage was done. Word spread fast. This wasn't just a bad engine. It was a betrayal. Cadillac buyers didn't baby their cars because they had to. They did it because they wanted to. These were people who washed their cars on Sunday mornings, who kept maintenance records in leather folders, who believed in the brand. And now they were facing $3,000 engine repairs on cars barely out of warranty. Some spent more on repairs than they'd spent on the car itself. Trade-in values collapsed. Insurance companies started writing off low-mileage Cadillacs because rebuilding them cost more than they were worth. Dealers were overwhelmed. Service bays stayed full. Loaners ran out. Customers who had never raised their voices were screaming at service managers. GM quietly extended warranties on some models. No press release, no admission. Just a memo to dealers authorizing goodwill repairs in certain cases. Engines were replaced instead of rebuilt because rebuilding them often didn't work. The aluminum block couldn't always be machined reliably. Overboring was limited to about 0.030 inches. Any more and the cylinder walls risked cracking or losing structural integrity. The iron liners were thin. The tolerances were unforgiving. And even a fixed HT4100 was never truly trusted. Mechanics who installed rebuilt engines told customers to sell the car, not because they were dishonest, but because they'd seen too many comebacks, too many second failures, too many broken promises. By the mid-1980s, Cadillac knew it had a problem. But here's the part most people don't realize. GM didn't abandon the HT4100 because it failed. They abandoned it because it failed publicly. Cadillac's entire brand was built on quiet confidence, on never having to explain yourself, on engineering that just worked, on being the car that senators and surgeons drove, the car you bought when you wanted to announce that you'd arrived. The HT4100 forced explanations. Suddenly, Cadillac owners were defending their purchase decisions at cocktail parties. Suddenly, the Mercedes down the block seemed more reliable. Suddenly, the brand that had defined American success was becoming a punchline. So GM did what it always does. They replaced it quietly. In 1985, Cadillac introduced the 4.1-liter HT4100 successor, the 4.5-liter V8. Bigger displacement, iron block, better oiling, more torque. Then came the 4.9-liter, even better. Fewer failures, actual reliability. The HT4100 was phased out by 1987. No apology, no announcement, no recall that admitted the scope of the problem. Just gone, erased from brochures, disappeared from dealer lots, forgotten by everyone except the owners still making payments on cars with dead engines. And yet, its shadow lingered. Because once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. Cadillac spent years trying to convince buyers that its engines were reliable again. Marketing campaigns emphasized quality. Engineering teams worked overtime. Executives gave interviews about lessons learned. Even when the North Star V8 arrived in the 1990s with 300 horsepower and advanced DOHC design, some buyers still remembered the early 80s. They remembered engines dying young. They remembered towing bills. They remembered dealers who couldn't help. They remembered disappointment. Some of them bought Lincolns instead. Some bought Mercedes. Some never bought American again. From an engineering standpoint, the HT4100 wasn't stupid. It was early. Too early. Aluminum blocks require perfect casting quality. Tight tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, advanced sealing technology that can handle thermal expansion, quality control that catches defects before they leave the factory. GM didn't fully have that yet. Not at the scale Cadillac demanded, not with the timeline they were given, not with the budget they were allowed. The concept was sound, the ambition was admirable, the execution was rushed, and Cadillac paid for it with its reputation. Today, surviving HT4100 cars are rare, not because collectors love them, not because enthusiasts hoard them, but because so many engines didn't survive. Junkyards crushed thousands of otherwise perfect Cadillacs because nobody wanted to fix the engines. Parts cars became scrap metal. History became landfill. When you see one running smoothly today, it's usually because the owner is meticulous. Coolant changed religiously, oil changed early, heat carefully managed, temperature gauge watched like a heart monitor, treated like a fragile artifact. Which is ironic, because Cadillac engines were never supposed to be fragile. They were supposed to be effortless. That's why GM regrets building the HT4100. Not because it was a bad idea, but because it broke a promise. It showed what happens when regulation pressure, corporate urgency, and unfinished technology collide. When executives say yes before engineers say ready. When timelines matter more than testing. And it reminds us of a hard truth. Sometimes, being first means being remembered for the wrong reason. Sometimes, ambition without patience creates disasters that echo for decades. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of GM's most infamous engines, let me know what story you want next. Another failed experiment? Another forgotten engine? Or another moment when engineering ambition went just a little too far? And if you don't want to miss it, make sure you're subscribed, because the next story is even wilder.